Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18 and welcome to the 10 Days of Tarot. Today I'm going to be answering 10 out of the 31 prompts from 31 Days of Tarot 2021. And for folks who don't know, 31 Days of Tarot is an annual occurrence every January started by Ethony, and I'll link to Ethony's website below where this year's prompts are, and it's basically 31 prompts that people answer, one prompt per day over the course of January on either, I think usually Instagram or YouTube, but maybe other places as well. I'm not sure. Those are the sites that I'm on, so that's where I see them. I've participated in 31 Days of Tarot before in its entirety, and I had initially decided not to do anything for 31 Days of Tarot this year because there were quite a few prompts that I felt like I didn't have anything to say for or anything particularly interesting to say, and there were other prompts that I feel like I had kind of covered elsewhere in ways that I felt happy with and like were sufficient to me, so I had figured I would just skip it. But then I saw Julie at Peekaboo Rose share a video in which she just answered select prompts from the 31 Days of Tarot, just all in one video, and I thought, what a great idea. I'm going to copy you, Julie, and I said that much in my comment on her video. And so here I am with my own 10 Days of Tarot. And so I just picked 10 prompts that I felt like I could answer feasibly in one video without being here for hours, and which I felt like might be of interest. I'm going to list the prompts that I'm going to answer in this video below with timestamps, so you can see which ones I've chosen and skip ahead if you would prefer. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So I'm starting off with day number 6 prompt. And that is the deck you finally crossed off your wish list in 2020. And I chose 2 here, one tarot and one oracle. And if you've watched my channel recently, the tarot will be no surprise, though the oracle I think might be. So the tarot deck that I finally crossed off my wish list was the Gaian Tarot by Joanna Powell Colbert. I've mentioned before that I was in the market for a Llewellyn printing of this deck, which is now out of print. The Llewellyn version with the Llewellyn cardstock is out of print. So I was waiting for that, and I had been kind of looking on eBay and had never found one that was a price that I felt comfortable paying. And I ended up getting this limited edition one directly from Joanna Powell Colbert after I learned of its existence from Liz at West Star Tarot. And I'm thrilled to finally have this deck in my collection because it has really been years of wanting to work with this deck, years and years and years. And so I'm thrilled to finally have a copy that I'm really happy with. It's huge. It's 4 inches by 6 inches. I've actually got a custom deck bag coming because I could not for the life of me find one that I felt was protective looking that would accommodate a deck this big. I shuffle it long ways. Even for me with big hands, it's a bit challenging to do it on the side. Even I can do it, but it's a bit tricky. But I'm very happy to have the Gaian Tarot by Joanna Powell Colbert. The Oracle deck I finally crossed off my wish list and got last year is a deck that I don't think I've actually shown on my channel at all, that I just received as a Christmas gift from my parents. And so this is an Oracle deck that I've wanted forever, and that is the Deck for Wonder Walking by Amy T. Wan. And this is not a new deck out, again, been on the wish list a while, but it is a deck that is focused on the idea of inspiring things to be open to or look for, to be curious about on a walk. And so the cards are watercolor, and they each have a term like journey or the moon. These are not going to pick up as beautiful as they are in person. Play. And there's a labyrinth on the back. And I'm so happy to have gotten this deck. I had put it on my little wish list. I give my parents a little wish list, usually it's mostly books, so that they have some sense of what I might be interested in each year, and this is what they had picked, and I was very happy with that. And I also received the Explorer's Journal of Wonder Walking, which is a larger, sold separately companion book that has, prompts associated with each card. And it's just beautiful. The artwork in the larger size is really gorgeous. So those are the two decks that I've finally crossed off my wish list, and I'm really happy to have them with me. And I'd like to make a couple of videos in the future about wonder walking for sure. Kasha from Tarot Map has made some beautiful wonder walking videos. Check them out if you haven't seen them. But where I live, it hasn't exactly been the kind of weather that I prefer to walk in between Christmas and now, so I've only been out a few times. But I will have more to say on that later. Number 8, since that was decks that crossed off my wish list in 2020, the top 5 decks on my wish list now is question number 8. And this did not distinguish between tarot and oracle, so I opted to talk about a mix of a few of those. The top 5 decks on my wish list. I have 2 out of print decks on my wish list that have been on my wish list forever. Again, it's similar to the Gaian Tarot in that I am watching places like eBay, but I do have kind of a ceiling in terms of what I would be willing to pay for a deck that's out of print. But those decks that I'm looking for my wish list, if you see one on eBay, let me know if it's a deck that you're not interested in. But the 2 that I've been looking for, they're on my wish list, are the Slow Holler Tarot, that's a collaborative deck by queer and southern artists, and the Delta Enduring Tarot by Egan. Both of these are out of print. They've been out of print for a while. But if I see one of them, or both of them, at different times, I'm sure, at a price that I feel okay with, those are the top of my wish list. Also on the wish list, and I'm going for 5 since that was the question, so that's 2. The third one I will say is the Dust to Onyx by Courtney Alexander in the travel sized, because I have the larger size and I really love it, but my reading space is not that big. So I feel like with the travel size being available, it is something that I would like to add to my collection as well. The travel size has a really hard, sturdy box that would make, bringing it places more feasible. I could lay out more cards. And, I've said before, I think that the Dust to Onyx, in terms of just production quality to hold that deck is second to none in my books and in my collection. So travel size Dust to Onyx. And then I have 2 oracle decks on my wish list that are on my written wish list. They're top of the wish list, and they're a similar theme as each other. And those are Sawyer's Nature Portals by Jamie Sawyer and Flora and Fauna of Africa by Jessie Jumanji. Both animal themed oracle decks. And actually the Flora and Fauna of Africa, as the name suggests, has a plant on each card as well. And these are both decks that I really love aesthetically. I think they're both beautiful. They are both quite different than other animal decks in my collection. The Sawyer's Nature Portals, is a round animal deck, and I don't have anything like that. And the Flora and Fauna of Africa has this beautiful kind of mix of beiges and browns in the background of the cards in its color palette. And that's a palette that I'm really, really attracted to. And it's not one that I have in an animal deck. I also don't have any decks that have plants, a plant on each card. So that one is kind of a 2 things I love and would love in one. So those are my 5: Slow Holler, Delta Enduring, Dust to Onyx Travel Sized, Sawyer's Nature Portals, and Flora and Fauna of Africa. That's the 5 that are on my wish list, and that's 5 that are or have been in print. So there are a couple of others that I'm waiting for Kickstarters to launch and things like this in the future, but I didn't include those here, just to clarify. Question number 11 and 12 are decks you want to work with more in 2021. So question number 11 for 31 Days of Tarot is the tarot deck that you want to work with more in 2021. And certainly, I could say the Gaian Tarot easily, because the Gaian Tarot is really new to my collection and I've wanted it for a long time. So of course that's one that I want to work more with. But for the sake of not repeating, the deck that I chose that I would like to work more with in 2021, that's a tarot deck, is the Nomad Tarot by Jennifer Drantel. And this is a deck that is elementally based. It's a pip deck. It's very much a pip deck. It looks black, but it's really a very, very dark navy. Those are the backs. It's elemental suits with crystals, moths, feathers, and shells. So shells for water, moths for fire, crystals for earth, and feathers for air. And it is a monochromatic, or I guess like dual chromatic, like a black and white, but it is, again, it's really, really deep navy, not black. And this is a deck that I ordered from Little Red Tarot quite a long time ago. I saw it, and I just saw this deck, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is a gorgeous deck. I really want to have this in my collection. It's just beautiful. No clue how to read pips. None whatsoever. But I was like, I'll learn if it means that I can read with this deck. Because it's so many things that I love. I love black and white decks. This is close. I love elemental, very strongly elemental suits. My practice is very elementally informed. So much I love in this deck. So I got it. And it's been out of print for quite a while, but I believe it's actually back in print now. So I got it thinking, okay, I'll just, I'll work with the guidebook and it'll be fine, even though I don't know how to read a pip deck and I have no idea, what to do with it. And it has this guidebook. I think this is actually sold separately, but I got it. And I didn't end up actually using it much because I don't love this guidebook. And the reason that I don't love it, it is well written. It has representations of all the cards, which is great. But what doesn't work for me about this guidebook is that the imagery in this deck is very unique, but the book does not give any sense of why it was chosen. So, for example, we have an octopus on the Temperance card. This write-up is a fairly conventional, I would say, understanding of the Temperance card with absolutely nothing in it about why an octopus is on this card, why it was chosen. Similarly for the pips, the way that this is written, there are some numerological keywords, which was kind of the closest, most helpful thing in the book. But for the minors, you get things like the fives concern struggle and loss. In the Five of Water, we see the emotional reaction to loss. Well, no, like in this deck in the Five of Water, you see 5 shells. That's it, right? There's no, person mourning over some spilled cups like in a Smith-Waite deck, right? But this is almost written without any reference to this deck at all. And as a beginner, I found that incredibly frustrating. And so I didn't really work with this deck all that much when I got it. So now that I've spent some time, particularly in 2019, I spent quite a bit of time learning to work with pip decks and Marseille decks and older decks. I feel a lot more comfortable now. And so I want to spend some time with the Nomad Tarot in 2021 in light of that study, because I think it feels a lot more approachable to me now than it did when I got it. So I would like to spend more time with it because I haven't spent much time with it, or as much as I would have hoped, considering how strongly I reacted to really wanting that deck and loving it aesthetically. Oracle deck you want to work with more in 2021. That's question 12. I chose for that prompt the Open Portal playing cards by James R. Eads. These were a Kickstarter, which I backed, and inside there are some different pamphlets here. There's 2 pamphlets, Open Portals for Oracle, and then how to play Open Portals as a game. And this is a playing card based Oracle deck. The Kickstarter ones had this cherry red gilding, and they came in the dark and light variations. This is actually in order right now. So there are jokers. There's the fractal tree, and then there's a full deck of playing cards with, again, not really keywords. Like, I wouldn't say keywords, I would say titles. So 2 of Spades, Portal for the Desert. Three of Spades, Portal for the Forest. Four of Spades, Portal for the Mountain, and so on. And this is similarly a deck that I backed, partly because it's beautiful, partly because if James R. Eads makes it, I'll back it, with no sense of knowing how to read playing cards at all. And I think that I've gotten hung up with this deck on the playing card aspect, such that it has made me work with it less, even though I think, with the booklet for Open Portals for Oracle, I don't think you need to know how to read playing cards to work with this at all. But the fact that I am not knowledgeable about reading playing cards, I've allowed to get in my way. So that's one that I want to work with more in 2021. And incidentally, I do really want to learn at some point. I do want to study reading playing cards in particular, because in some ways reading playing cards is the thing that I've been working towards with my tarot journey, because I have ancestors, very recent ancestors, like grandparents, siblings, who read playing cards for a living. And so I've always wanted to learn that, and I've never just sat down and, spent the study time on it. So that's something that I will be working on. Question number 14. What is your go-to tarot book and why? So I picked two, one of which is actually not a tarot book, but you'll see what I mean. So for my two go-to tarot books, and for go-to is just books that I pull off the shelf often, the first that I chose was Tarot Correspondences, Ancient Secrets for Everyday Readers by T. Susan Chang. And this book is, one that I've engaged with as a reference book, and this is just like a treasure trove of information. There are associations for everything. Elemental here, I just flipped to, the elemental associations of the court cards, to nomenclature, astrology, and corresponding minors. And there's lots of tables in this book and charts. And I love just kind of poring over this kind of information. It's not something that, I anticipate ever like memorizing all this information or anything like that. But I love, if I'm working with a particular card, to look at all of these different connections here. And it's really well presented, I think, and just so researched, so incredibly researched. And there's lots of ample bibliography in the back, which I love. I am meaning to this year read this cover to cover, and if you'd be interested in a review of this book, I'll probably do that, because I've definitely seen others mention that this is a book that is very much worth reading cover to cover. It's not something I've done, but it's a go-to as a reference. So Tarot Correspondences by T. Susan Chang is one. Then the other book that isn't a tarot book that I love as a go-to book is this one, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, The Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, A Voyage from 1 to 10 by Michael S. Schneider. This is a book that I learned about from Brian Cormac Carr and his Tarot to the Nines series. He refers to this book several times in that series. And this is a book, as it sounds, about the numbers 1 to 10, exploring the mathematical principles, this is from the back of the book, exploring the mathematical principles made visible in flowers, shells, crystals, plants, and the human body, expressed in the symbolic language of folk sayings and fairy tales, myth and religion, art, and architecture. This is a new view of mathematics, not one that we learned at school, but a comprehensive guide to the patterns that recur through the universe and underlie human affairs. And so, not a tarot book, but in terms of learning to read pip decks, and, for me, doing so involved developing numerological associations as well as suit associations and reading those together, and looking for ways for me to build associations with numbers that made sense to me. This is the book that helped me with that. I really like this book. So those are my go-to tarot books. And why? That was the question. Number 15, your best/worst/memorable tarot moment of 2020. I just shout out and thank you. The memorable moment for me of 2020 was receiving a wonderful gift from my friend Julie at Peekaboo Rose, and I've never had a tarot-related gift before, unless you count my first deck being gifted to me by my mom and grandma, and it was the Tarot of Architectural Objects by Tina at Queen of Wands, and this deck is in order right now too. I ended up working with this deck for a very long time after I received it, exclusively, because I was working with this book, Pathworking the Tarot by Lisa Robertson, and I chose this deck to work through that book with, and I really enjoyed that experience and enjoyed this deck, and I might have cried a little about this gift, which is not like me, but I did, and I just appreciate it so much, and it ended up being one that I worked with in a really sustained way, and that was a really special thing. And I didn't read a lot of books. I didn't read a lot of tarot books in 2020, actually. I was reading Lenormand books and doing other things, and the Pathworking the Tarot book, for that reason, and working with this deck, was like a standout thing that I did with tarot in 2020, so having that deck was just really, really special. That's the best tarot moment. Number 17. What card in the deck do you look out for the most when you get a new deck? If you don't like that card, does it ruin the deck for you? So I know that like a lot of folks have cards like this, right? And I will say that there are cards that I look for before I even buy a deck. Like if I can see these cards ahead, then I will want to. Because yes, if I don't like a card, some of these few cards, it can really, really bother me. And I've just focused on major arcana here. There are a couple minors I would say as well, but for major arcana, the moon card, I'm a Pisces, so the moon card is special to me. The moon card is the 18 in my channel name. And I look for the moon card because I find that in a number of decks and a number of books, the moon card can really be depicted negatively, or like on balance, more negative than positive. And I don't like that. I don't think of the moon card in that way, obviously. I don't think there's any bad cards, right, per se. But I think that the moon can kind of be depicted in ways that are not always in alignment with what I think is like the expansiveness of the meaning of that card and the possibility of that card and like the mystery and seductiveness, of the moon card. And so I look for that because if it's a negative looking moon card, I don't like that. And I also really look at the Empress, Emperor, and Lovers cards, all for kind of similar reasons, which have to do with gender stereotypes and essentialism. I really do not like when the Empress and Emperor card are depicted in kind of biologically essentialist ways, in very kind of gendered binary ways that fall into stereotypes, in my opinion. And similarly, the Lovers card, I think, if it's just kind of a hetero makeout card, it's not usually what I want. Which is not to say that there aren't Lovers cards like that are fine for me, but I do think that those cards, Lovers, Empress, and Emperor, can be gender stereotypy in ways that I don't appreciate, and absolutely those can turn me off a deck. So those I definitely look for sure. I do also look for in the minors. I will look at the Three of Swords. I do like when it's not an impaled heart. That said, the Three of Swords being the impaled heart does not ruin a deck for me. I do appreciate, though, when it is something, when it's something else. Number 18 is, do you read reversals? Why or why not? I, for a very long time, and this is another one of the prompts that I didn't choose for this, was what's a tarot myth that you believed that you no longer believe? And this kind of answers that as well. For a very, very long time, I did not think that you could do a good tarot reading without reversals. The idea of not using reversals seemed very strange to me. It was like, this halves the number of meanings in the deck. Why would you not read with reversals? didn't everybody learn to read with reversals? Like, it made no sense to me, the idea that you wouldn't want to include them. And now, I don't always read with reversals. This is a thing that has changed. I do read with reversals for Marseille decks, and generally for very strongly pip decks. I will read with reversals, because I think for reading predominantly then numerologically, having that reversal adds something for me that I really like. However, I no longer am nearly as wedded to reading reversals in other kinds of decks, like Smith-Waite decks, or maybe more decks that are more kind of their own lineage, that don't adhere to a system. I'm not as dead set on reversals as I was before. And I am more inclined to just have less rigid spread positions, or pick more than one card for each position, which Robert M. Place talks about in his book, Tarot, History, Symbolism, and Divination, I think it is, talks about what if you draw multiple cards for each spread position, that gives you more than reversals would, right? So, do I read with reversals? Used to all the time. Now, 50-50, I would say. And with Oracle decks, never. Like, I've never ever read with an Oracle deck with reversals. I don't feel like they're usually made for that, though. Question number 28. How do you feel about tarot deck modification? Do you draw on your decks, trim the borders, or is it a no-go for you? I think tarot deck modification is great, conceptually, but I'm terrified of it in practice. So I have only trimmed a couple of decks, and one of them was because I had ruined the edges with water. I've shown that deck before, Heart and Hands Tarot. Thank goodness it was a really big deck, because trimming it was okay. And other than that, my deck modification at this point is limited due to edging decks with Sharpie. That's all I've done. I did buy one of those Distress ink pads, but even that, I'm kind of afraid that I will make a mess. I have never written on cards. No, I'm scared. My hands are not very steady. I think that I am more liable to make a mess than improve things, but I do aspire to get better at trimming cards, because I really don't like keywords. So I would like to get better at that. But yeah, mostly deck modification to me is fantastic in concept, scary in practice. And number 30 is the last question. Share one of the new things that you learned about tarot in the last year. I did not spend a lot of time again studying tarot in 2020. I was studying Lenormand more so in terms of learning, something new. I did read a few tarot books, which was good, or some of them better than others. I could say more about that in another context. But I would say that what I learned more so about tarot in terms of my depth here especially was I feel like I have really in the last year learned a lot about what my deck style preferences are and what I really look for in a deck. And I've been very deliberate about observing, which decks I reach for the most, which decks I feel most attracted to, which decks I feel perhaps, initially attracted to when I see them online, but upon further consideration, figure out that I don't actually need or want and don't regret not getting. So that whole kind of process has really helped me better understand and be able to name what works for me in a tarot deck. And I think that that's really great. I definitely feel like I've gone through phases, especially early on learning and early on realizing there were more decks out there than the Smith-Waite, or the deck that I had. I definitely went through kind of periods there where I was really kind of experimenting with different kinds of things. Maybe I'll like this or maybe I'll like this. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I'm grateful for those periods, and I found excellent decks that way. And if that's something that someone wants to do, I would encourage them to experiment in that way. But now I feel like I'm much more secure in what works for me and why. So that's what I've learned about tarot in the last year. That is my 10 days of tarot. I've tried to keep it short, not totally successfully as usual, But 30 minutes is the 3 minutes per question. That's pretty good for me, right? So thank you so much for watching. I wish you all a happy new year, and I will see you again soon. Have a good one.